Welcome back, guys, to the Bear Podcast Show with me, Sean Scullion, aka the Handsome Stranger, Owen Mallon, aka the Bear, Aidan the Face for Radio behind the scenes, and today we are joined with Sharon and Sean from Community Rescue Service (CRS). Welcome, guys.
Thank you. Very good of you, Sean. Thanks, Bear.
Thanks very much.
Oh,
guys.
don't forget Aidan behind the
behind the scenes.
Just before we get going, I want to cover one thing that Sean sent a pin location of the studio to Sean. And when she come in, he goes, "Did you find us all right?" She goes, "Sean, we work for a search and rescue." Brilliant.
Well,
brilliant.
To be fair,
I thought I would ask.
Well, you were right to ask, because to be fair, I had a phoner from halfway up the street.
That's true.
And say to her, "Where are we? I don't want to be accused of being lost in Cookstown and being search and rescue."
But I just thought that was brilliant. I was like, I want to get this on tape. So, guys, thank you very much for coming up. And look, listen, we're going to touch on the important job you do. And so we're not going to keep you all day, because we know there may be somebody that might need you. But what before we get into exactly what it is you do, you just want to give us a wee background on we'll let ladies go first. And do you want to give us a background, Sharon, on who you are and how it came about? And then we'll jump in and ask Sean.
I've been involved in the Community Rescue Service for the last 8 years. I joined the Portland Own team 8 years ago, and I joined then as a search and rescue technician, as everyone does. And I've absolutely loved that whole experience. But now I sit alongside Sean here on the board of directors as well. So I have a multi-role, and it's really, really great, a class thing to be involved in. I just absolutely love it.
And Sean, how did it come about for you?
Well, first thing is, I'm going to say, Sean McCarry is my name. I'm the founder of the Community Rescue Service, but maybe importantly for your listeners, I had to find out when I come in here what a podcast was. Being slightly more than 33, it's amazing to me that these things go on all over the place, but I do keep up to date with the technology, and it's lovely. I think, thanks very much, like Sharon said, for asking to come along here. We founded the Community Rescue Service back in 2007, and obviously, as a founder, I've been involved from back then. I've been a bit longer than Sharon. Yeah. And and unlike her, I'm not advertising the fact that I'm single, because I'm not. I'm married and 4 children and some grandchildren. So I'm at it a long time. Search and rescue, probably involved in it for about 46 years now. So doing that in different roles. And then whenever we had the peace process, normalisation coming to the province, the need was there, and the police approached me and said, we need to get the lowland search and rescue capability into Northern Ireland. We've got the mountain rescue, we've got the cave, lots of other things going on. So we need lowland because we're going to be reducing the number of available police and military to be able to do what was done during the Troubles. So we're a sort of child, I want to use that expression, the child of the peace process. And we've been at it ever since. And we run now with over 300 volunteers and do in excess of 400 missing persons, high-risk missing persons a year, as one of the roles that we carry out.
Well, just as you said, a lowlands for someone on the screen like me. What is a lowland? So I take it quite specifically means that it's not in the mountain and it's not in the shore front. It's just everywhere in between then. So you have the biggest patch.
God, Bear, I have to say that when I come in here, Sean and Aidan said to me, let's give you a wee briefing here. Bear doesn't really understand very much. So could you make it really, really simple for him? So,
you know what? Look, listen, it's maybe the viewers.
Now I know why they call you Bear. But that's a very good question. And you're right. For anybody out there, maybe make it really simple for anybody that doesn't really understand the structure. The simple structure is that you've got mountains with 2,000 feet and up. Mountain rescue teams are voluntary teams. Lowland rescue teams cover from there till we meet the Coast Guard on the beach at the high water mark. And our teams are all voluntary as well. And then you've cave rescue under the ground. And normally what would be described as throughout the whole UK, Ireland and Europe, mountain, cave and lowland are sister organisations, and they're described as the statutory voluntaries. From the perspective of no statutory funding as such, but we're working statutorily for those statutory services on the 999 system. So we're emergency response vehicles, and same as police cars, or I know your colleague Sean here is in the Fire and Rescue Service, and the same sort of status as that, even though we're all entirely voluntary. And I know Sean's retained, you're voluntary as well, so it's worth mentioning in the fire service you've got retained and full-time. we just completely are full-time volunteers, for want of a better word.
So obviously then, as you said, it was a child of the Troubles, which, let's face it, this is a good prodigy to leave behind. But so obviously you've seen some change in technology, you've seen change in times and thing, but it's grown quite a bit from when it was first yourself till now. Is it what's
it over 300? You said 300.
I would have in excess of 300. 240 of them would be search technicians, which are the people who do the actual on the ground searching. But they couldn't do any of that without the support teams that are in place, which is, our admin's done by volunteers, everything else is done by volunteers. Even our solicitors and our accountants do give their time free of charge as companies that do that, and we're very grateful for that. So we try and run it on a completely volunteer ethos, and that's why we call it the Community Rescue Service. So it involves the whole entire community to help the whole entire community. So, but it's grown dramatically because whenever we first started off, we always knew we needed to cover the entire province, which is 6 counties. And whereas in England there, you'd have a county team in every county attached to each police service. The exception to that, of course, would be the Metropolitan one, the London Search and Rescue, which I also am a founding member of that and I'm one of the trustees. But whenever you look at the rest of the county teams throughout the rest of the UK, they're small teams looking after small counties. We've got a large team looking after 6 counties, which is absolutely required.
Do you have like subsections, or as you said, you're in Portland? Is there like like different bases, or is there like one central hub? And what way is that?
We're one combined team,
yes,
but we are located in separate districts.
Right.
So we have 5 districts across Northern Ireland, and within each district, then you have multiple teams, 2 or 3. Usually, and the aim of the game with that is that we're always taught from day dot that time equals survivability. So it's really a case of making sure we have teams based strategically across the country to make sure we can get to where we need to be in the quickest possible time.
So, and this, as you say, Burr, I'm asking the very simple questions because I'm actually very intrigued. But Sean, I would tortured Sean when he first joined the fire service. What are you doing this and what are you doing that, and like just the operational procedure, what is it, and
But I'm sitting at the other side of the table. I'm like, give me an example. Give me an example. There's a couple of calls you go to, because in my head I'm like, what does it entail? How does it work? Who is it that you're actually going to rescue? Could you give me a few examples?
Yeah, well, if we take the lowland search and rescue side of it as one of the things services we supply. From that perspective, Sean, we would be going to high-risk missing persons. That's for people where the police have decided, for whatever reason, that person's life is at immediate risk. If we don't do something, the police don't do something, if somebody doesn't do something, there's a very high chance that they're going to lose their life. Now, that, for example, could start because somebody's a 3-year-old or 4-year-old goes missing, can't look after themselves, immediately high risk. Somebody's elderly parent or elderly grandparent goes missing because they've got dementia, or Alzheimer's, or whatever other thing they have, and they can't look after themselves. Those immediately go to high risk. But then there's the in-between category of lots of other ones where people are missing, but they might just be missing a few hours. And the question is, do they go high right away, or do they go? So it's a very difficult procedure, but the police are the people who set what standard that's at, whether it's low, medium, or high. And generally, we'll be tasked. We do go to some medium ones because they're quite risky. But we'll generally go to the high-risk ones, which as I said earlier on, could be in excess of 400 a year, which for us as a voluntary organisation, we could do 3 in a 1 hour. So we might not do another one for 2 days, but generally speaking, we're doing at least one per day, at least one call a day. And I'll give you an example, as Sean asked for there, and maybe we'll get a call for an elderly person who got out the door at 4 in the morning. Their carer or their partner didn't know that they were missing, and we have to go and try and locate that person. But we might not get that call to the carer comes in at 9 o'clock in the morning, or the relative wakes us up at whatever time it happens to be. So they've got a head start on us. And I've often heard it said, Johnny or Jeannie, they can't walk very far. They're very infirm. And we've got them 7 miles away, or 8 miles away, or 10 miles away. And we often look at the statistics and they'll say, well, statistically, someone with those conditions don't open gates, or they don't do this. And we've got them 10 fields across where they've went through 10 gates, if you for want of a better word. So you can't always just assume that statistics are going to be right or what you've seen before is right. But there is a pattern, and there are some things that you can gather from it, and that helps you speed up the operation. So we would go from that maybe then to the next thing you go to is where, and it's very rare, I have to say, that children go missing, but we have had some cases of quite young people, and recently we had a unfortunately, a young 12-year-old girl that went missing who had ended up in a fatality. So, and for our people, that can be quite very, very difficult, as you can understand, but nowhere near as difficult as it is for the families. So it's important that, as Sharon said earlier on, that we get out there in a timely, quick and professional manner at all times. So all our people are uniformed, ranked, structured organisation, full command and control structure, and a control room that does all that. For a voluntary organisation, that's quite unusual, but we do need it in place. Yeah.
Where does the level of intelligence come from? Is the police investigation? Is it questions that you have asked? So that obviously you're doing it that long, you develop a gut feeling for some of what's happening, but like it's different police officers, different stations. So like you probably built up relationships with them, maybe do training or connect at some point, so that you're all sort of, you're not just getting fed information that's inaccurate and creating a response to something that's not fully mapped out. But if time is of the essence, is it the police that gather information? Do you send somebody there to get some information for yourselves, or what way does that work?
And again, it's a well-structured and good question, because it is multifaceted in its answer, and it isn't the term that you put the question. That we could end up with a lot of information very quickly. We could end up with no information at all, and mostly you've got very little information. Person's name, if you look at the description, etc. And as the police receive the information, we'll get the information. As we receive the information, the police will get the information. But sometimes people are more comfortable talking to us, particularly in some of the neighbourhoods and the particular communities about the country. They feel more comfortable, and it's got nothing to do with whether they like the police or don't like the police. People get extremely nervous whenever you're talking to a police officer, and when they get talking to us, it's a much more relaxed, a bit like us here at a chat today, it's a much more relaxed atmosphere, in the sense, even though there's an urgency to it, they don't seem the same pressure. They're not scared to tell us that the person takes drugs. They're not scared to tell us that they've been doing something they shouldn't be doing, because that's fine. And actually, the police at that moment in time aren't really interested in that, but it's not easy for a relative to think that. So we get many levels of information coming from many different places, and every bit of information is suspect. Now, that sounds quite strange to say, but we have to be suspect every piece of information, because throughout all of that, there's good information and there's bad information. And that's where the experience and the processes and the procedures that we have in place come into their own. We will filter that continuously check it out. We could have people out searching through fields, through woods, through etc. But we've also got a full team of people on social media, online. We've got people checking out by driving to places, going to places and inquiring about, did you see this person or did you not see this person? Is this true or not? And likewise, the police will do exactly the same. The secret is to make sure that all that information is current and accurate and up to date. And that's where we keep this flow going between the police POLSA, which is a police search advisor, and like myself as a national search manager. And it all comes through both of us at all times. So there's no mix-up on the police side, there's no mix-up on our side. There's two people have all the information. They're both talking to each other. That's really important.
Well, then, whenever you get the call, obviously, you'll go till presumably the last place that the person was seen. Mm-hmm. And then is your primary search from there out? Yeah. Or is it, no, they've been seen in the forest 10 mile up the road? Or, how do you gauge on that? Where you need to go first? And do you primary start from where the person was first, last seen, so their house?
See, there's the difference between somebody who knows what he's talking about and somebody who doesn't.
You know what? It's only taken us 6 months for Sean's skills to just land right there.
Thank you.
And
Thank
you know what we can do post-production?
Why not? Why not give him a drum roll? Because
this man's wild hard on me. Hey. I'm only thinking of the more simple.
Quite right you are. And Sean's doing exactly the same here, because actually is exactly right. Normally you do have to start in this standard procedure. You start place last seen, and we'll do that anyway, no matter what. But we can receive information en route, and when we get there, that somebody was seen matching the description and such. Even people have said in times, I definitely seen him. I worked with him, or he went to school with him, and he was down, or she was such and such a place. And it turned out that's not correct. It also turns out sometimes it is correct. So we followed the standard procedure. We start our teams at the place last seen, but we have enough resources that we also start at the place where the person was reportedly seen as well. And that can sometimes be multiple. We could have 5-6 start points, but we'll always start and do round the last place last seen, because that statistically is one of the most common places where you'll find them within 300 to 500 metres of where they went missing. That sounds simple, in a lot of areas. That's a big lot of ground to search, a lot of complicated things to do. And if you ever played hide and seek when you were younger, and I'm sure looking at YouTube wise, that wasn't something you were shy of doing.
No.
Particularly if you had to go for your tea or whatever it was. I done it myself, and I seen we had a small backyard, not much bigger than, truthfully, twice the size of this room we're sitting in. And me and my two friends could go and play hide and seek in that, and you couldn't have found the first one because he got the best hiding place, and you had to learn from it. It's a bit like that as well. It's only the difference is this is life and death hide and seek for what. And I'm not making it out to be a game. I don't mean it that way, but it is actually life and death. The person we're looking for, and mostly that we go looking for, which is different from lots of other search and rescue. The people we go looking for don't want to be found. Like if Sean and his colleagues go out the fire engine to help somebody, it's because they got a 999 call. We need help. Here's where it's at. Mostly, now I know you help us on lots of occasions as well, but I'm just talking in general. Same with the lifeboat, same with the Coast Guard, same with mountain rescue. I'm broke my ankle at the top of the hill here. Here's roughly where I am. Or trying. There's a bit of search involved, but there's an awful lot of rescue involved. Complicated rescue from fire engines, complicated rescue from helicopters, etc., etc. In our particular business that we're in, of the lowland search rescue environment, it's about large numbers of highly trained people finding the person first. The extraction is normally a bit less complicated technically because from the perspective of we can find paths to come back out, or we make our own paths, or we cut our way through it, or we get them out to civilization again, for want of a better word, and in a shorter journey with less multi-million-pound piece of equipment. But we have a multi-million-pound team of people, for want of a better word. They're invaluable because they're the resource that we use the most, as the people themselves. So that's where we go do that bit, and we start off at the place last seen on all occasions, and that's where the information comes from. However, it'll not be the first time, and we're talking just before we started broadcast about some anecdotes, about some successful things. We always give as much information to people on their way to the call out, because we have had lots of occasions when somebody calls me and said, I have just seen somebody matching that description as I'm coming up the road here, that road in Belfast, or I'm heading out, towards Ballymena. I've seen somebody walk along the dual carriageway. And, I think people when they join the community rescue service say their life changes because they're driving up the road and they look at every single person and they go, I wonder will they go missing later on? And I do it myself. You say, must remember the colour of their jumper, the colour of their clothes. And I'm sure all these people think, who's those strange people staring at me here? But we're actually remembering as much as we can, because 5 minutes later we might get a call to say that person was missing. And we've had lots of lovely success stories where it comes to that we found the person actually while we're travelling to the incident itself. And I would like to tell you it's every time. It's not very often, but it does happen, and we're aware of that.
So, look, not to be stereotypical, but in a lot of the cases, I suppose it would be a breakdown in mental health. The person's decided that they don't want to be found their way. Finding them is one part of the puzzle, but you must approach and talk. Is there a training in that, or is that just that personal ability that the type of person that wants to volunteer the time is obviously a caring person first and foremost? But is there like a, when you get to somebody and if they're in distress or something, there's, it's hard to ask because I'm taking one view, and I'm sure that the no one call, and I would say that the same as Sean, no one call is ever the same. It's not the same thing. It's not a uniform procedure. It's not a uniform answer. But you would have to have a degree of a good understanding of mental health for people if you because a lot of people missing. I would be right in saying that the majority of situations is maybe a breakdown in mental health, or they're not well, or that's why they've wanted to go missing. Would there be training in that? So that when you do approach one part of the puzzle, find them where they're at, and then helping when you get there, being that person,
100%. When we join as volunteers, or when we get people apply to join, the CRS isn't just something that you can kind of click your fingers and be involved in tomorrow. There's quite a heavy process to get through the application process. But we are fully trained. There's quite a 12-week, 16-week fairly rigorous training program at the start before you even set your feet on the ground. And that will involve first aid, it'll involve search techniques, it'll involve all of those things that we need to be able to do as volunteers to set our feet on the ground. And the reality, I think, for me I remember in my training course 8 years ago, we had a little I don't know what you call it, training exercise at one stage, and we actually missed the missing person in that training exercise.
Of course you did.
He set that up.
But what I will say is, you never forget. So in our incident, we forgot to. We just didn't check behind the door.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you now, in 8 years, I've never not opened a door again.
Yeah.
You know, so you're only. I think for me, we're only as good as our training. So Sean and that team of Lowland and the CRS have made sure that our training is rigorous. So once you get through that initial training program, our teams train every week in life, every week, and then obviously you're constantly training as you're out. You know, because the more you do, the more you learn.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a. We would have a lot of folk just think maybe you can just kind of
Fill out the application form and there you go.
You get
I'm
a
here.
uniform. It's really not like that.
I
It's a
suppose,
massive commitment.
Sorry, Shannon. A really, really important part of that, as well as, of course, to answer what Bear said, there's the people are trained in assist and PIPs and other courses that allow them to engage fully with someone who is maybe not just in the best place at that moment in time. The people we go missing for, and mental health is a part of it, but it's generally a crisis in somebody's life. Now, we always talk about it as a crisis. And crisis for one person is something straightforward for another person. Something straightforward for another person is a crisis for that other person. And it's just how it is. And I mean, something that you would maybe yourself say, what are they getting fussed about that for? That can be the most serious thing in that person's life at that moment in time, because we're only seeing that one thing. We don't see all the other things that led up to it, and et cetera, et cetera. So we try and gather, when you're talking about intelligence, we try and gather as much information from families and friends as possible, so that whenever we do find the person, that we've got a good background, good understanding, so we can engage with all that in facts, and it wouldn't be everybody engaged with them, because we make sure that whoever's engaging with them understands exactly what they're doing. This is slightly different from a police negotiator. If we got somebody threatened to take their life in the top of some dangerous thing, need to be, we'll use the police negotiators to negotiate them back wherever possible. But our person might be the first person in contact with them, or it could be a fireman, or it could be a police. It could be anybody that hasn't got those, hasn't normally done that for a day-to-day life. And some of our people wouldn't normally do that, but they'll have some training. But there'll be lots of people within our teams who have lots of experience at talking to someone in the middle of a crisis. And it must help them an awful lot. It helps me an awful lot in your other life, and business life, and home life, and all the rest of it. But it certainly helps that person at the moment in time if you have that level of training, understanding, and the information, the personal information and bits and pieces that are important. And sometimes when I'm talking to families before we find a person, I say to them, tell me everything. Tell me, just like we're doing, try and make it as informal as possible with urgency, but you want to make sure that you get as much information as possible, because it's the little small things that whenever you're trying to connect with that person, that the small little details are the things that will make that connection. And once you get the connection going, you're then on the grounds where you're on a bit of a road to recovery, a road to try and get them back out of it again. And in most occasions, that will work very, very easily. Our last thing we ever want to do is actually lay hands on somebody or try to force them into a position where they come with us. We want them to walk with us. We want them to talk with us. Like a walkie-talkie situation. We walk and talk and try and make sure that we're walking them, but they're not really realising they're walking back out of it, or they do realise, but they're comfortable doing that. And the police are very, very keen to support us with that. And I remember when we first started doing this, and that would have happened all over. This is not a criticism of police Northern Ireland. The standard procedure would be somebody goes into handcuffs for their own safety in the back of the car. And I'm not saying every policeman, that happened a lot. Very rarely would we ever see that nowadays. And it's a last resort, for want of a better word, and it's only ever used if that person is still a danger to themselves or others around them. And that's very, very, if it's handled with time. And time is the key thing here. Our teams have got time to spend with these people who are in a crisis at that moment in time. People sometimes need that moment to bring us back from the brink. And that moment can last from seconds to hours,
I know time is, and we said you couldn't draw a line under every call. They're completely different. But the one thing, the guidelines in time, there's certain, like a golden time, and then it gets hard, isn't it? That pretty much stands over most. It's important. Like you must react. What sort of response time round would you have, or what way does that work? Once you're called, is it a bleeper system the same as Sean there, or you're talking about communication? Is it by a phone, or is there radio, or is there like certain people that take information? Because if too many people is handling information, Chinese whispers, and you hear one thing and then somebody else in another car says, no, it's this. Is there one like central point of communication and one central way, or what way does that work?
Yeah, just like Sean and the police and everybody else would do in their organisation, everything in our organisation goes through control. Okay. Everything's through a control point. And the first call, it comes through in control and it goes back, everything goes out through that. So, I mean, even we're standing in the same line and somebody wants to use the radio to talk to somebody up, but they can't do that. Everything goes back through control, and control passes the message. And we often pass information, but we often don't pass information from a control point, because it's only relevant information that's important. Information overload is not what we're trying to do with our search technicians or people on the ground. They know who they're looking for, enough information to know it's that person, and enough information to get them in the right place. And that's our job as search managers, to give them that information. But we may have reams of other bits of information that only becomes relevant at certain points to us, but wouldn't be relevant to the quality of the search. Matter of fact, might even be, might even degrade the search, for want of a better word. So we're very careful about what we put out, but we're also very careful we give them enough information to go out there and find that person that's missing. And missing persons is one of the things that we do. We'll often be called to other calls too, for like maybe somebody we cover some of the rivers and inland rivers and waterways here, the River Bann, and 62 kilometres from up at Toom right the whole way down to Port Stewart. And we'd have quite a number, 9 boats on there and some spare boats. And so we'll call to other things like a canoeist in difficulty, or a boat with a broken down engine. So you get lots of other calls, or rescue calls or assistance calls. We'll get calls from the police where somebody's absconded from a vehicle, but they can't, they've had an accident, but they've left. Can't find them at home. Now, they may have left because they had a few drinks. They may have left because they don't want, they've done too fast around the corner where they want to be. But from a police perspective and from our perspective, we don't know that person's okay. They could be lying down the fields. And often appear out at some calls, we use specialist FLIR, forward looking infrared equipment and specialist stuff, to make sure that we can locate that person and try and make sure they're not lying in a ditch or a field or have banged their head and get out of the car. And that's where we'd often come into contact with Sean and his colleagues in the fire service as well at 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, where they're out doing the accident and helping to, and then we're out there then to try and find the person that's missing as well. So there's a whole mix of things that happen within the Community Rescue Service. But as Sharon mentioned earlier on, whenever we're looking for volunteers, and we're always looking for volunteers, we're looking for people, and we have 3 things we really look for. And I always stick to this, and we stick to it all along. We look for availability, suitability, and capability. You need somebody who's available, you need somebody who's suitable, and then you can make them capable. So there's 2 of those things are 100% essential, and one of them we can train. The only one we can train is the capability thing. We can't train availability and we can't train suitability. So that's a basic how we look for someone. They have to be available. People have to have availability. Even though you're working others, you still have to have a level of availability. Not as high as some people would think, but still no point in not being available at all. But the suitability side of it is really, really important. All of our people are vetted to the highest degree. We're dealing with high risk, vulnerable, missing people of all ages and different backgrounds. So the level of enhanced access, NI background checks and stuff for us is really, really important, and it's done for every single individual on a regular basis. And a requirement as being a member to report anything that happens to you that would have any effect on us. I mean, one of the things we often joke about is if one of our people is in a bar and out for the night or in a nightclub and they get into a fight, that could affect their membership of the organisation. Whether it's their fault or not, we would have to look at that very carefully, because when the people we go looking for and their families can't say, "Oh, that's just your man's involved with that crowd there, and he was sure he's causing trouble." Then, so we've got to be very, very aware, just like anybody in police, fire, ambulance, and other organisations are, that you're never off duty, and it's a very unfortunate thing, but it's part of your commitment to the community. I see Sean sitting there across me, and he'll agree with us here. It is, unfortunately, there's an expectation. I wouldn't say unfortunate. But I think it's quite right. There's an expectation that if you're going to be representative of that organisation and working in your community, that you're going to be at least one of those sensible, upstanding, sort of sensible people within the community. It's very, very important.
That was a nice way to talk about me there, Sean.
Well, I'll just. I can see you were sitting there.
I love the fact, Sean, you described your whole community and your whole team, and Sean thought it was discussing him.
Thank you.
So but No,
That's all my training
I do
kicking in
get
there,
what you
Bear,
say.
you know.
I would say too, in that situation, obviously there's people that won't meet the criteria and just don't fit that. But I would say anyone listening here, and obviously we're going to include all your details, and it's resonating with what you're saying, and they're like, I have that hunger to help, and I feel that I could bring some attributes to that to give you a shout. But people generally that would volunteer to be in that situation to help wouldn't be, they would be the right type if they're available, and you say like you can train the rest, but you wouldn't say that you would have to turn too many away, would you? The type of person that would will, or maybe you're very exacting, Sean. But I get what you're saying. And it's very clear to me, even though it's a voluntary, it's a very precise, well trained. It's a machine. It runs the same as not to draw parallels, but there's a search and rescue and a fire and rescue, but a very similar procedure. Look, we have exacting standards from our people. We operate professionally and in a manner, because let's look at it this our way. When shit goes sideways, people always look for people to blame. Do you know what I mean? You're doing the best you can. You're volunteering. It still wouldn't matter. I've seen it in things, and I've seen it in, I don't want to bring it back to rallying, but I've seen it rallying, marshals are volunteers, and if something happens, the first thing they want to do is go and point the finger at a marshal, and you're like, wait a minute, this person's give up their Sunday evening, their Saturday evening to be here. But you have to keep yourself right. You have to have a level of accountability, because people in situations like that and emotions are high, they'd be very quick to run and point and say, that's in another scenario. If you fail to find the person, and you've done the best you can, you received the information, maybe after a while you find out the information was wrong or you weren't, but blame gets thrown about. I'm sure you have received that. I'm sure you have been on the end of, and I would say, I know from talking to you, and I know from and just listening here now, you've set up an organisation and 300 volunteers are very well structured, and the amount of calls you receive, and obviously the police work hand in hand. They wouldn't bother ringing you if you were no good to them. It would be hard then if you don't get the success, if you don't find, now not always you'll find, it'll not always be a good answer, but the families always want a loved one found. Whether it's the worst case scenario, they need closure, they want found, but it's bound to be haunting then if you don't find somebody.
Yeah,
and there's bound to be in situations.
That's a good point. When we've started to now, we haven't not found anybody we went looking for, but unfortunately, as you would say, in 10% of the cases, on average, that they will be deceased already before we go looking for them, and we're actually in the finding and recovery situation, which is very, very important to families as well. I mean, we never underestimate how important that is. They want their loved one back, regardless of, they'd rather have them back alive, and we'd rather bring them back alive. But it's very important, and we keep reinstilling it in our teams because it's really important for their mental health as well. That's our volunteers' mental health, that they understand. Even we've got a person who's deceased, that person needs to come back to their family, and that's part of our job. So it's part of our role and what we do. Even it's not a paid job, it's paid all and by thanks from the family and the community. That's enough pay for us. But there's a massive bit to this here that goes on. It's not seen. There's the background bit that goes on. But our high vis jackets and our people in our vehicles are all out there. That's the front bit of it. The backboard bit behind it, where you've all the standards and all the equipment and everything else that has to be kept and maintained and everything else that goes on. I would say to you, whenever we get called out, I'm responsible, not just for the person that's missing, but I'm responsible for all of those people that are going looking for them. Sharon's one of our directors, and the board of directors, our board of directors, which is a voluntary board, is responsible for all of that, including me. So really, at the end of the day, our board of directors, which is only 6 people, are responsible for the lives of all of those people who are going out there. And the only way we can ensure that those people are going to be safe, our people in the first instance, because they must be safe to help other people, is that we've got very structured, very disciplined, and a very well organised team of people going out there with who are not letting the adrenaline overtake the need to get there and help save somebody's life. They've got to make sure that they're doing it at all times in the most professional way they can, which starts right from the minute you start to put your shoes and socks on. Make sure you put on the right boots and the right socks, because that could affect the quality of the search, but also affect you if you slip in the wrong place and hurt yourself. So it's about making sure that from the minute you're waking up at 3 a.m. or 2 a.m. or 5 a.m. for a call, or whatever time of day it is, even you're sitting having your tea, you start switching into that professional rescue mode at all times, that professional search mode at all times. And we would be involved in the search and rescue side, we're involved in safety patrols and particularly in Belfast city centre, where we've one life a week on average, according to police figures that we're saving. Which is like over 50 people a year that are going to be here because our teams were there on the scene doing that. And
the police have saved one life that they know in Belfast alone.
On our safety patrols.
40 years. That's amazing.
And that's running now this 14 years. And so you got to count that. It's a lot of people. And we're heavily involved in the nighttime economy there, doing that sort of things. We run our voluntary emergency bikes that every day of the week are out there with our volunteer bikers and emergency bikes are all out there doing bloods, or particularly doing the breast milk, the human milk being delivered to the premature babies. So mother has got cancer treatment and she can't breastfeed herself, but the baby won't survive unless it gets fed with human milk. That has to be done on a regular time basis, and they've only got a short window of time from the milk bank and Enniskillen to get that all over the whole of Northern Ireland, and some parts of Donegal, delivered all over. And our guys are about doing that as well. Now, not the same search and rescue people, but another side of another branch of the organisation. And then on top of that, it's not just whenever our people go out searching for a missing person that I'm responsible. I feel personally responsible for it, and the board. We're also thinking about the many people that go out there. We have 60 support team out, volunteers out fundraising all the time. If you're in Ballycastle the weekend, you probably get tortured with it, us trying to lift money off you. But we rely on that money. We don't get money from the government. The money comes from the community. The reason our organisation is so successful and is successful is because it's community staffed, community funded, right, and community needed, isn't it? So that's why whenever the name was first come up, and I actually wasn't a big fan of the name, I have to say. I have to put my head down here. I often admit to this. But whenever we first met with the police, the then Chief Constable, about setting this up, he said, look, Sean, I really think you should have the name community involved in this. And that was way back in 2007 when we were just coming out of the trouble. And he said, you need the name community in there. Now, you think about this here. You're trying to set up an organisation and there's this big, long name coming in the middle of it called community. And you're thinking, yeah, nice name, but, where's that fit in with rescue? Best decision I ever gave into. And it wasn't that hard to be convinced, to be honest with you. It was something that never came from my mind. So I can't take the credit for the community bit, but I can certainly have my own bit and put into the rest of it that was done. I agreed after 2 or 3 minutes of conversation with him that the community was rightly important. So that's right in the centre. That's right. The first bit of our name of organisation is community, but it's the first thing that's important about everything we do. So with all that going on, Sean and Bear, but this is an ongoing 24-a-day situation. We're at it all the time, and if we're not doing it at work, we're doing it at home, and if we're doing it at home and at work, and there's a really dedicated bunch of people out there. And one of the things that was really interesting was that Prince William has a real interest in mental health and emergency services, and he ran a foundation. He runs a foundation to look at that, and the foundation worked out that we're one of the organisations with the lowest level of PTSD of any organisation. And whenever he eventually came himself, and actually we convinced him to go searching with us in Cave Hill in Belfast. And spent the afternoon with us walking around with a stick.
You just so briskly passed across. Just had Prince William up Cave Hill with us.
But it's very important because you're talking about the future king of England, and this is his dad's and doing the job at the minute. But I'm sure Charles at some stage will want to hang the boots up, or else. Someday make a decision.
Do you think you could get him over and get him out for a search before he does?
Well, I don't think I'd get him phone of your podcast. But one of the important reasons I brought that was to say to you that he was so interested. He himself was so personally interested in why would we, as an organisation, as a voluntary organisation, have such a low level of post-traumatic stress disorder, which is, just in case anybody doesn't, that's what I'm talking, PTSD. And it can happen to you for any reason. You don't have to be in an emergency service. It can happen to you if you're in an accident in your life and stuff. It's where you've got the trauma of it lives with you afterwards. And whenever he sat down with our volunteers, which he did very kindly, and all ages, we handpicked people out of it who from different ages and different backgrounds. And every one of them, and I sat there very, very proudly and listened to the answers right beside Prince William whenever they asked a question. And I watched his face, and he said, why do you think that is? And the youngest of them to the oldest said, because we're a family, right? Because we're a family. Now, I have to say, it probably still makes me feel a bit emotional when I hear that, because I was never as proud of him to hear that we've actually created an organisation that's a family. And anybody that's in it would say to you, you actually become part of a family. You can't leave it. You just feel so part of it, and you feel that you really want to do it. And that's why that we're able to look after our people. But it's also why our people are able to look after the rest of the community and try to help look after this community, because we can't do it on our own. As I made this earlier on, this is a community effort. It really is. And there's a way for the community now to be involved in looking after their own safety, their own well-being, their own crisis, and that's to support us and help us do what we do. They're actively involved in that every day of the week. So.
But I'm glad you touched on that, because I've often quizzed Sean, and a lot of people think, oh, the glamour of things, and oh Jesus, from your child and it was fireman's ham or things like that, and you're like, that's great. And then Sean would just say, I would see something, maybe I'm thinking there's a crash at the road, and Sean was like, I attended that this morning, but didn't say it, and you'd be like, you obviously have attended some horrific things, the same as Sean, and you're only human. You're only and as you say, that level of support, you need to look after each other's mental health. You need to reach out and say, last night was tough. You want to grab a tea? That wasn't. No, you may have witnessed things that people may only witness once in their life, and you may have had a month of 3 or 4 of them things
absolutely.
where in their entire life they may experience that awful situation once, and hopefully never. But I suppose it's important to have that togetherness, so that you can turn around and say, that was hard on us all. Do you want to grab a tea? And not just like move past it, but you
can't afford to have elephant in the room either.
Yeah.
You just can't. But we have our teams have a massive camaraderie. Like, you have to. Like what you're saying, you're dealing with fairly raw stuff. They're not all bad, like we said earlier on, or Sean said earlier on. They're not all bad, but when you get a tough one, no matter what age bracket the person's in or whatever, you've got to rely on the person next to you. So you can't not know them either. So we spend a lot of time with each other every week, and being, learning about each other, and spend, a bit of crack outside, social perspective as well.
I know Sean will relate to this bit of it here. One of them, and not to speak for you, but you relate to this, and I'm really interested in what you have to say after, Sean. But we're very particular as a management team within There's about not having somebody in there who doesn't fit. Mm-hmm. And the reason would be for this, and I know you're just agreeing with it immediately, because in teams that work in these circumstances here, you can deal with a lot of things, but what you can't deal with is the wrong person alongside you and aftermath or even during it. And we're very particular about, I often say, and I'm sure it applies to the emergency services, that there's no such thing as a bad person in search and rescue. Everybody joins these organisations like fire service, police, ourselves, for the right reason. But there's often the wrong person. They're not bad, they're just wrong. And they don't know it's wrong, so you have to make it clear to them that it's wrong for them. And I know I use the metaphorical tap on the shoulder. We often, not often, it never happens, but we're very quick at our vetting and all the rest of it. But certain people's lives change, their circumstances change, and if they get into the wrong place, you're doing them a big favour. You're looking after their health. You're looking after them very well whenever you remove them from that situation, but you're equally looking after the mental health and the trauma, that is reducing the trauma that can happen from these things by taking someone out of that environment long before it happens, if they're going to be wrong when it happens. And I'm not going to explain that any further, and Sean's not like I said here, because
he knows exactly,
but he knows exactly what I'm talking about.
And he still has to go on 10 calls, so he knows exactly what you're saying.
And I know what you're saying, Bear, when you said about, Sean comes in here and he gets on with it, and he's gone from something, as many of our colleagues in the emergency service do, to come from something that is out of the ordinary. It's not something you want to see every day, but you have to deal with it. And then you have to get on with life. Well, the only way you can get on with that life is to make sure that there's not other things hanging on in there that are often negative. And I mean, it sounds funny. There's different types of negativity, but that's negative in itself. You don't need any other negativity attached to that, is the way to put it.
But you're totally right. It's not that you're disconnecting yourself from it, but you have to be a certain type of person to do that certain type of job. And people that are, say, wanting to be a volunteer, their intentions might be good. They want to join, they want to help, but they can't wrap their head around what they're actually going to get to do or what they're going out to see. I'll give an example. Like, I had a fire call one night. It was a house fire and there was a fatality, and it was 4:00 in the morning, and we get back to the station at 6. I was in work for 6:30. My day went on as normal. And it was only till about 12 o'clock that day that people around the town started hearing. And then boys were coming into the office. They're like, oh, you had that call. And it was only at 12 o'clock that I actually started thinking about what I was actually at. And I was like, was that the day or was that yesterday?
Yeah.
Like, it was a disconnection from it.
Absolutely.
Total disconnection. And it was only afterwards. And I was like, right, so that did happen. There was a fatality. You know, somebody did lose their life. But it's then starting to process that. And that's what I think people need to understand, that once you see a trauma like that, you have to start processing it properly and speaking to the right people, speaking to your colleagues, you know. And if you don't have that family connection, as in I can't go and have a conversation with you and go, geez, that's hit me hard. Who's you go and turn to? You know, you can't bottle that up.
So you've got nobody. You've got nobody else.
You have nobody. Yeah.
And I think within some of them, what happens a lot of the time is that those people finish a shift. I mean, I talk to the police about this sometimes, and you've got 2 police officers maybe with us and we're doing a body recovery, and they're finishing their shift, and they're saying, oh, well, once we're finished here, we're off. They might not see each other again for a week or 2 weeks. They might be back on the same shift the next day again, but they might not be working with each other. And I think that's why sometimes it adds to the trauma slightly, because unless you're there and actually see it, because as you know yourself, Sean, whenever there's things you're dealing with that are very difficult, you don't need to have the conversation about it. You just need to have a conversation. You don't want to talk about the detail necessarily, but you want to talk about how you are and how the other person is. And sometimes you just want to know how the other person is, because that helps you know how you are. And it's that ongoing round and round thing. But I wouldn't want anybody listening to think that we're all in doom and gloom here. Because,
No.
We wouldn't do it, including yourself, Sean, if we didn't feel that we were doing something useful and doing something important and actually getting something positive in return from that, even it's just knowing that you've done it for other people.
There's a very, very high reward in it.
Absolutely.
There is.
Massive.
Like,
Huge.
you guys are going out there and you are finding them people. And once you find them people, it's the massive high that you're getting. You're like, we went out to do a job. We achieved that. Everybody's gone home.
Yeah.
And that's it.
And it's key that everybody is home, including the person that's listening, whether they're with us now in body or not. It's just important that they come home.
Yeah.
And it's important to come home. And we never give up. Hope is the last thing that you want to ever lose. You have to keep hope at all times. And the families keep hope right through to the last moment as well. So important that we keep everybody upbeat. That's another bit of my job as well. I have to keep everybody upbeat about what's going on. Because one just follows the other. You can finish a really, really dramatic situation and go into the next one, and it can be very uplifting. It won't take away necessarily 100% what happened in the trauma, but we live for the good ones, is the right way to put it. We don't live for the bad ones.
Yeah.
And look, and I think it was important that we touched on that, and it's not always the right thing, but there's bound to be some beautiful situations where, it just, you've made the difference, and that person may be now getting the help. And that was the point that they've turned around, or if it was someone's young and you found them and you got them back, like there must be some elation, and just look around the rest of the team and say, we pulled a yeah, we've done that. That, there must be some self-gratification. There must be some buzz out of that.
But that's what we're saying earlier. The reward's massive. Like, you've more good situations than you do bad.
We don't want to, you can throw it, but we don't want to get into specifics, but it's nice to hear that, and it's nice to know it, because that as you say, that there's 10% that's not straight away is not the answer you want.
You see when you go out, years ago when I was on the ground constantly, like when you go out and look for some wee elderly person, wee man or woman that doesn't even know they're missing, and you find them and they don't even know that you're looking for them, like that's just a really beautiful thing.
I remember Jordy, who works with us, I was talking about earlier on. I mean, it sent to me on the radio. I think we've spotted this lady, an elderly lady, who went out to go to the shops at something like 1 o'clock. And after, you remember in Belfast, she went out to go to the shops in Belfast at 1 o'clock. And she had severe dementia, but she shouldn't have been out of the house. She wasn't allowed out on her own. But her husband, who went to the bathroom, to the toilet, that's what he needed to do. When he came out of the toilet, he back into his kitchen to make her something for her lunch. And when he came back out, no sign of his wife. And he, a very lovely gentleman he was too, originally from England, a really nice man. And he was telling us about, I went in to make her a sandwich, and I came back out and she was gone, and blah, 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 blah. And just telling me lots about her. We were sending the boys out to look for her. And we searched. It was the most awful day, I have to say. It was a lovely sunny lunchtime, but I think what happened was, as soon as we turned up, somebody turned on the taps and it just started to rain, as it does. And it didn't just rain. It done one of those Northern Ireland things. Like I often talk about the different types of rain when you're in search and rescue and you're in certain search and rescue world. You know all the different types of rain. We've got what we call dry rain. We've got wet rain. We've got that horrible rain. The horrible rain it was the one where, if you know yourself, you go into the car, you get soaked in that short space of time. Whereas I've seen me run out in the rain to go to the car and back, and again, there wasn't hardly a drop on me. And if you don't come from Northern Ireland, people don't really get that one. But we've got every type of rain you'd want, but this was the one you didn't want. And it was just coming down like in the shower. That's the right way to put it to you. And we were thinking of this wee woman, God, she was like 88 years old, severe dementia. Had no idea about where she was. And she'd gone with her shopping bag, and she'd gone with her the only things were missing was her coat and her shopping bag, and thank goodness she had a coat. And at the very start, it wasn't obvious her shopping bag was missing, because her husband never thought anything of it. He just said, her coat's missing. And it was after having a conversation with him, he said to me, I said, look, there's anything else missing? I said, anything else missing? Take her gloves. No, have a good look around there. He eventually said, that old silly shopping bag she insists on me taking every time we go together to the supermarket, it's gone. Right, so she's probably gone off for onto the shops. What shop do you normally go to? Now, if I was to tell you, this happened probably 6 miles outside Belfast, and in the up suburbs outside Belfast. I'll not give any more detail on that. But we eventually, one of our teams said, and I'll just give you an idea of the area we're trying to search at, about 11 o'clock that night.
Yeah, it was late.
Late on, we were just, everybody was at it. We were searching everywhere, any resource we could get, try and find her. And on the Antrim Road in Belfast, one of our teams phoned the radio in and said, there's a lady sitting at the bus stop here, and it was still raining, pretty heavily. Sitting at the bus stop here. The coat doesn't match the description, right? Her hair doesn't match the description, but she has a shopping bag, and at this time of the night, she one of those proper shopping bags. And he said, I think we should probably go and speak to her. So we agreed. Just keep an eye on her. One of our senior officers, Jordy, went around. He went around to speak to her, and we're listening to it all on the radio and control. I can hear everything that's going on. And of course, he puts it on live, and I can hear the conversation because it's which we want to hear between him and her. And he said to her, "Hello, dear. Where are you going? Are you going somewhere this time of night?" She says, "I'm waiting for the bus. I'm going to the shops." All right. And he, of course, immediately alarmed. She's not going to the shops that time of night. And but what had happened was her husband was colourblind. So he'd give us the wrong colour for her coat.
Jesus.
Being a man, like 3 of us are in this room, or 4 if you take Aidan into it, well, not really.
Doesn't really know her hair.
But he had no idea whether it was a quarter length coat or a short. So he'd given us the wrong length of the coat for us, which is another thing. And of course, her hair was completely different because he failed to remember that one of her treats was she went to get her hair done and it had been cut for much shorter. But anyway, long story short, it was a lady. And I remember listening with a lovely glad heart and us all smiling in the control room to Georgie saying, "Well, sure, come on and I'll give you a lift to the shops." Because we would know full well not to say, "Well, don't be silly, the shops aren't open this time of night." Or, "Do you don't realise you're lost?" Or anything. Sure, he says, "Sure, I'll give you a lift to the shops. I'll see if you get in the bus." "Oh, would you do that, son?" And I could hear that whole conversation go on. And it was one of the nicest things to be able to do is for me to drive round straight away to her husband, say, who was in an awful state at this stage, obviously, because it was late on at night, soaking wet a day. And I said to him, "Look, your wife's on the way back down. She's coming home in one of our vehicles here now. And she's perfectly okay and everything's all right." And those little things are, stick with you. I mean, we're sitting talking about it here now.
That's making me smile.
But whenever, we had we were all, I have to say, the underwear was soaking, and we didn't pee ourselves around the gut. It was just that. It was running down the back of your neck. It was like we've waterproof jackets. Well, they were no longer waterproof. It was just one of those days. Yeah. And my very shoes, and I was my shoes had about an inch of water in the bottom of my boots. So, it just was one of those wet days. And you think you're out in the monsoon out in India or where it was, but we were all able to go and smile. And none of us had tea. We'd probably ate sandwiches from here or there, whoever brought us what. Soggy sandwiches, have you ever had them with crisps? It's not the nicest thing. But we were all elated to the point that, if you'd have given us £1 million, I don't think any of us would have been any happier. That's the truth. And those are the things that stick with you. I remember every single person that was deceased. It might sound strange, everybody, because I would probably deal with, I'm going to say to you, 40 to 50 a year, and personally myself, and I would actually be managing the scene. And that's quite a lot over the years. But I can tell you, going back all the years, every year I started doing this, which is 46 years ago, I can remember every single one of them. I might not be able to give you their names, but I could remember them all. And if you give me the name, I would know exactly where it was and what time. And that's a strange thing for me. But I also remember most of the really good successful ones as well. Just likewise, I couldn't probably give you their name, but I could tell you the story behind it. So one, in my opinion, balances the other, as I said earlier on. And it's very, very important that that's the case, because you do need the good with the bad. You need the happy stories as well. And we, as I said, we're surprised quite often by how far people can travel, that actually the relatives would tell you they couldn't take us out the front gate. It's amazing, totally amazing.
Well, and you have to have that bit of crack and sense of humour in them scenarios, and you do need that. But we touched on it there, and I want to go back to it because you're volunteers, and you know it's a big operation. But you talked on funding, and it's backed by the community. You know, we're well aware that in here, and people are great here, and we have our ambulance now, and we know how much funding is required now. Do you know what sort of figure it takes to keep an operation that size going for the year?
Yeah, absolutely. I know every penny of it because I have to try and find it along with Sharon. We just to stand still, it takes £500,000, and we don't pay for any of our premises. We do pay. It's wrong. Lots of very, very good people and good businesses give us a property, a building that we can use and don't charge us for it. There's a few about here as well. But we still have to pay for the cost to run that building. We can't expect them to do that. So we might not pay rent, but we still use the building. But we've got, if we think we run 32 vehicles, we're running over 22 boats, right? and lots of other equipment. Has to all be serviced, maintained, looked after, and it has to be kept to the right standard. We have to keep renewing it all the time. We put up a lot of miles. If you imagine, we're doing over 400 missing persons. So some of those can last. Some of them last from minutes to others last months. I mean, one of the longest we ever done was 10.5 months looking for a young man. We eventually got him in a river up near Strabane. And you know, we were there every day for 10.5 months, our volunteers, travelling from all over the place and run. And I mean, the cost of that was enormous. But that family will never know what the cost was because we wouldn't mention that. We never took a single penny of the family, right? That's our policy. So we don't expect families to pay for us. We expect what to happen is that we'll continually, through our profile and through the work we do, continue to run events, run fundraising events, run fundraising days, and gather support from people within the community. And if there's anybody listening to this, of course, who wants to do something for us, I mean, we'll make sure you have our contact details. And if there's anybody interested in joining, I mean, you mentioned to me earlier on about and I mentioned in the conversation, I'm sure you get a lot of volunteers, you don't turn too many away, but actually we don't turn anybody away. We're trying to find a slot for them. But when it comes to the search and rescue technicians, we could go through 100 to get 10. And probably will. And it's not different from, again, looking at my friend across the table, the other Sean here, it's not any different from the standard is very high. And also, we've people who come, we could go right down from down to 25% out of 100. So 25 of them would be down to the initial getting to get stages, have cleared all the other bits and pieces and hurdles. And then we start to talk about the more detail and stuff, and then we'll filter it down to maybe 20, and then it goes back down. And by the time we're finished, somewhere between 10 and 15 of those will end up search technicians. Now, that's how long and big the commitment is. And Sharon talks there about, you know, we had a program of 16 weeks. That's just initial stuff, because she's quite right. I mean, they'll not be on the ground really doing a search till they've got all their modules done. Then they're mentored continually for a year. They've got a year's probation. And if we feel we have to extend that, we'll extend it up to 2 years. But if you have to get probation, extend it past 2 years, then we're going to have to say it's not for you. Somewhere in between the year and the 2 years, because you shouldn't need to extend it past that. There's a reason for it. You're struggling for some reason. And we'll pick up on that. And we have the monthly debriefs with every single probationary member and talk to them about how it's working for them, how it's not. They've got their weekly chat with their unit commanders. So there's a continuous support network there to try and get the people from being a member of the public on the street to into a professional searcher, and not professional all but paid. But what we do is we're mentoring them and trying to put them on. But we inevitably have quite a high fallout rate. But once they get past that stage, they're with us a long time.
Can't get rid of us after that.
Well, certain people like Sharon.
There's only one way out. But so, and we wanted to touch on that. But one other aspect I wanted to touch on, and I think this is risky because I'm sure that there comes as much risk with this as there is reward, is the use of social media. In because we all know that, you know, people with all the best will and intentions, the internet's full of some dark people as well. If you're putting out for the help, and people with even if people want to help, like, so if somebody goes missing, the community obviously wants to help. But I'm sure to you sometimes that could be more of a hindrance than a help. You know, with all the best will in the world, you know, you could see how that would, you know, in vast open lands, maybe people, you know, might help. But you could see with all the will in the world, like if you put a campaign out on social media or you have a team on social media, how do you weed the intelligence out of that? How do you even go about that? Because I just know that my mind would boggle, and there's some sick people in the world that would be writing things too. But does it help? You know, especially straight away if you want to get a picture out, is that a policy you have, or is that?
Sean's better to answer that, but from my tiny little bit of experience, we don't ever. So if someone goes missing, we will never publish on socials what we're doing or where we're at.
So would you encourage the family to maybe not? Because I know maybe a family, and sometimes half the problem is it's like a third cousin who thinks they're doing something great and they go and put up a picture and the next thing it's going. And
Bear, I'm just grabbing at the microphone here, just waiting for you to stop.
Because
you just
time to get it wound down.
Pushed the right buttons on me. I have to do it. I'll give you an example of this here, and I'm glad you brought it up, because if we can get this message out to anybody that ends up with somebody in crisis, first thing I'm going to say is we won't put a single searcher out there that we don't know everything about, their background check to the nth degree, their training done to the nth degree. We won't put a single person out in that ground to look for your loved one. Why would you put strangers out there to do it? Or people that you barely know? Why put out a social media campaign, which could include the person who made them go missing in the first place? Or the person that could go find them is the person they're running away from, who they're on the edge of taking their own life, and suddenly out through the woods where they're trying to find solace and get their heads together appears the person that they are trying to avoid.
Yeah.
I just struggle sometimes, and I know people mean well, but I see people go missing, and it's happening more and more often, and all of a sudden it's all over social media, and it's not family. It's a so-called friend of the family. And I don't mean to insult anybody that's done this in the past, because some well-meaning people do this. Matter of fact, I'd say it's a bit like what I said earlier on. There's not bad people, there's just the wrong people. This is the wrong thing. It's the wrong thing. If we need help like that, we would ask for it, right? But we're left with 3, 4, 200, 100 people all wanting to know what they can do to help, stand and it's distracting us away. We're having to look after their safety. The police are handing them into us, look, you know, you need to manage them because they're not allowed to. And we've all these people queuing up and saying, what can I do, what can I do? Or even worse than that, you've all these people who head out on their own, and they're doing what they can do, and they tramp over evidence, they tramp over any trails that we can get. And we come, and there's been 100 people down the same path. And I could go on and tell you, but so to answer that question, social media is vitally important to us, right? And as a tool for us to find out as much as we can about that missing person and where they might be. We've got lots of ways of doing that, and confidence, and lots of ways of doing it. That doesn't affect that person for the rest of their life. But for people to put on a campaign and say, we're meeting at 7 o'clock, can as many people as possible come, and we're going to find Ginny or Joe or whatever it happens to be. I had asked them to think long and hard about that. If they're listening to this, think long and hard about that, and actually come and ask us, do we need that? Ask the police, do we need that? Because truthfully, often we have to ask them not to do that. And I know how desperate families are to find their loved one. But if I give you the statistic, 99.9% of the people that go missing are found by people like ourselves, people like Sean's organisation, people like the police. They're not found by members of the public. However, the risk you're put out there by putting all those people out there to them and to your loved one is far outweighs any benefit you're going to get from that.
Well, I'm actually really glad then we touched on that, and because you see it all the time, people put that. And we often say, think before you do these things. And also, if somebody's mental health state's not in a great way and they've gone missing and you have recovered them and nobody's aware that happened, their recovery is going to be eased.
Yeah.
And everyone coming up and going, here you were missing, you know, and I often thought that way. I often thought, right, this person's not mentally well and they've went missing. God willing they're found. But if you share this round and everyone knows, they're going to be remembered as the person that could share in the campaign, and you know, I often thought that to me is weird, you know. But I think sometimes people that do these things want attention too, you know, And I know that might be awful.
There's a bit of that too, Sean. Yeah. And I wouldn't class everybody like that. I think there's some very
100%.
well-meaning people, but there's also people who do it for the wrong reasons. And then there's also people that go out on the ground who are there for the wrong reasons, and that's the people we're trying to avoid. And whilst there might be, again, 99% of the people that's out there are good, decent, straightforward people, you're going to have at least, and it's laws of averages there, probabilities there, you're going to have at least one person who is, and hopefully that's not the person that's going to find the person that's missing, because that can have such a detrimental effect. You know, the other thing that talking about social media, I if any listeners are listening to this here, and I would appeal to them, especially young people, young ladies, young men, you know, don't think because Facebook decided to call somebody that you link up with a friend that they're a friend. I think it's one of the worst things that ever happened in this world is, and it's not because of my age, by the way. I know you're looking at me here. I'm quite modern in my thinking with regards to this, but I can tell you I'm very factual in my thinking. That I've got the experience to back this up. Whenever you've got a young lady or a young man who the only people they're communicating with or who they look up to or who their peers are strangers who are so-called friends on social media, the number of young people that we go looking for or we have to intervene with who have had such a bullying time or bad time on social media because they're taking the view of somebody who's a so-called friend. Look, you see, if your mother and father tells you you look well, that should be really, really, it's reliable information. That's the best way to put it. It's a good opinion, right? You might not necessarily listen to your dad if you're a young lady who thinks your dress is too short or something like that. That's fine. Take your mother's opinion. She'll probably know whether it was good enough or not. But you see, with regards, you go and you get your hair done or you get your makeup on and you go on social media with a nice photograph. And some idiot who's a stranger who actually is linked as a friend because they're linked to somebody else, comes on and says something nasty about you. Just like they're not real friends in social media, their opinion is not real either. It's irrelevant. And you have to really get your head around this. Social media is a wonderful thing. It's very important, but it can be misused. Just like the volunteers who come out to search can be misused. Just like you just got to take it with a pinch of salt at times. And I think if you can really train yourself to understand 1,000 friends on Facebook is not 1,000 friends. No. My late mother said to me one time, let me tell you something, Sean. She said, if you've got one friend, you're a lucky person, a true friend. If you get two in life, you're an exceptionally lucky person. I'm an exceptionally lucky person because I've got lots of friends, but I made most of them through real things like search and rescue, the community rescue, and work and everything else, not through social media. And I'm not going to make any more friends through this because I actually really have a problem with that side of it. And
I think you're right. I often say go to it when it's your birthday and there's 150 people write happy birthday. You wouldn't have 3 people walk up to you and say happy birthday. Do you know what I mean?
Well, where's the 150 presents?
But you're right, and we could go into that. But I'm glad we touched on that because I often wonder, do you help share or do you not? But one thing I want to ask you about in social media, and look, there was a young lad lost in this area last year, and there was everyone wanted to help and they wanted to do something. And I often thought, you know, and there was a young guy local was thermal imaging camera, and that's what he was putting it up. And I was like, we donated to it, and I was like, if that'll help. But sometimes and I'm not taking away from him because I hope that what he's doing is helping. But sometimes the miseducation, the misinformation, everything through social media and people's forming their opinions of what happens through social media. Technology like that, is that something that you use or is this the way? Does this help or not? What levels of technology would it be that you would use or? Well,
I mean, a classic example of this, and you're using the term thermal imaging, which is a bit like, you know, GPS and like other things that are all used nowadays. I mean, not to keep harping back to Sean, but Sean and the fire service, they'll have a thermal imaging camera that they use for looking at a fire. But the range of that is within a building. And truthfulness, and they're often asked by the police, and we've had lots of discussions of this, can you use your thermal image to look for a missing person? They're going to see a very short distance with it, right? It's just the technology. Mm-hmm. It's meant for a particular purpose. And this is where you get thermal imaging, and I get the same with sonar. Whenever we use sonar, I mean, I've got a sonar on my boat. It's a fish finder, no offense, mate. That's what it is. It's for finding fish. Finding human beings is completely different. Yeah. You know, if we're going to use a sonar, we're using a sonar that costs £50,000-60,000. It's the latest technology. It's somewhat classified. We're using our thermal imaging. It's the exact same. The technology we use, I mean, a set of our thermal imaging binoculars or camera is over £40,000 each. Now, I'm not saying it because we're trying to we policing us by them between us, because we can't hold it without the police actually giving us permission, because it's at a classified level for the stuff that's in it.
Yeah.
It can be used in your crane, it can be used right. So whenever we're looking, we can see clearly 3 to 3.5, maybe 4 kilometres, right? And Sean's sitting here. The stuff that Sean has, which is much better than people are buying out there off the street. And you can buy one now for your phone and it can make the house glow and all the rest of it. It's not going to find what we're looking for necessarily, unless they're standing in front of you, and you don't need a thermal imaging camera for that. Even the stuff that the fire service would use is designed to look inside buildings and inside rooms, right? That's the reason it's there. And if you take it and shine it out across a bit of a garden, you'll see if there's something there. Okay, no problem. But if you want to look down across the fields, it starts to have limitations, very much so. And it's horses for courses. I wouldn't discourage people who want to try and do. I think you were talking about somebody there who's interested in doing that.
I think it was a drone.
Well, I know exactly the one you're talking about, but I would ask the question, when we're looking for volunteers and we've got 7 or 8 drones of our own and do the same sort of thing and spent lots of money donated by public and raised by ourselves to have all that stuff in place, when about is that going to be tasked and the members of the public giving the money to that? And even they do, how many calls is that going to go to in the year? Why not come along if you're interested in that and volunteer to join the likes of our organisation or Mountain Rescue or somebody else and say, I've got an interest in this, I can do this, and be used in a more efficient and coordinated way. Like that's I think setting up on your own to try and do those sorts of things won't achieve the outcome that would be the best for everybody concerned, including the person missing, the people who donate, and even for yourself, because it's going to be a bit of disappointment. But if we're always looking for people, and if anybody's listening, anybody has that idea, do it in a structured, coordinated way, because the standards that we work to are national standards, and I'm not saying that anybody else is not working to them. It's tightly controlled. We're not going to put it up in front of a helicopter. I mean, if we're running our drones, we know where the police helicopter is. That person who's running it privately won't know that. And that can have a detrimental effect and things as well. So we just need to be very careful about it.
Well,
technology is great, but you've got to use it in the right way.
But there's always as technology. Mm-hmm. Technology is good until it's used the wrong way.
Yeah,
but so, look, listen, for me personally, when that was happening, I wish I was more aware of what you guys do. And there was a link there for people. And I don't mean this, and we've done a draw with their ambulance, and we'll do a draw with you guys too. We've done a draw with our ambulance. We're well aware of to help out, and what happens a lot with that is worst case scenario, the worst thing in the world. You guys, the Coast Guard, their ambulance, they're all things I donate money till that I hope I never see any of or never need any of. But I always say to people, cancer units, stuff like that, donate to things you hope you never hear tell of.
Mm-hmm. Funny enough, Bear, I'd say after meeting you today, I'm hoping I never meet you.
But
I mean that the best possible.
That's what I'm saying to people, and it's great that that's there. And we're going to include the links, and we'll do a competition to raise some money. But this is what I'm saying. These are the type of things you never ever want. But I was not fully aware of.
But that's okay. We would get asked sometimes to go and speak at schools or church groups or stuff
every
like
week.
That there. And our opening line usually is, people don't have a clue who we are, but my opening line is, if you don't know who we are, that's a really good
That's
thing.
because we're doing our job right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier on, not discussing, or people are all saying to confidentiality. You're in Cookstown here, right? Okay. I hope you don't mind me saying it. You're allowed to say that.
Oh yeah, 100%.
You're Cookstown, I know.
The magic
can tell
the magic is ruined. Hollywood, we aren't
Hollywood. But we agreed to come along here today to talk to you because we want awareness to be raised. We're not actually, and may sound like we're not here to fundraise or promote money. And it's very nice you to say you're going to help out. And that, well, anybody wants to, fantastic. We need all the help we can get. But that's not the message we're wanting to put out. The message we want to put out there is very much about, this is what we're doing, why we do it. And if you think you can help, great. Sometimes the best way to help is just by not doing something or even asking before you start to do it. I think that's really, really important. And you mentioned that. But you see as regards coming and raising the awareness and trying to make sure that everybody knows what's on. Essential to all of this is the fact that if somebody goes missing in Cookstown and we don't keep it very tight and keep it very within it, exactly what you described earlier on will happen. I can guarantee you half of this town or 3/4 of this town would know immediately who it was.
Yeah,
but they'll know because there's a bit of activity up around up around Sean's house, heavily up around Bear's house, or Sharon's house. You know what I mean? It's not too long before they start. So even when we come in to do the searches, often we'll station ourselves and post ourselves further away from it. You know, we're not going to come rushing on blue lights, and et cetera, even though we have them all for every. That's not what they're there for. We're going to come in and start the search. So often in places, and we're talking this earlier on, the last known position, if that's the person's home, that's going to be very sensitively dealt with, for want of a better word, because we just do not want to raise awareness about the fact that this is who it was. Because recovery from a moment of crisis is much more rapid and much better, much more long lasting if that person doesn't have to face the embarrassment. It's a private situation. And whilst publicly we have to search for a missing person, we often have to ask, and police ask a family, do you mind, and we talked about social media earlier on, can we put this up on social media? That's a big decision for a family. And that decision becomes even harder for those in the future. And I want to think, everybody out there to think about how many other people, young people, older people, members of our family and our community will be affected by this. If we create an environment where it's embarrassing like it used to be, it's seen as a lesser thing to have a moment of crisis in your life, or how it want to be. And we've got, thankfully, to a point where everybody would accept now, every single person, including all of us in this room, at some stage will have a mental health challenge. It's just where it takes you. That's the right way to put it. And hopefully most of us will walk away from that and get on with our lives. But we'll certainly walk away from it much better and much easier if the whole country doesn't know about it, and particularly if our whole community and whole town doesn't know about it. Because it's not, it can become embarrassing, but it also can be very difficult because people keep asking you, how are you? And whatever you're feeling and where some people feel, that's the last thing you want to ask,
Yeah.
So it's an important message, and I think
I think the overall message is, and we've often said this, people need to think about what they're posting, because next year's there and the following year's there. So look, it's brilliant for fundraising, brilliant for awareness, and there's ways to utilise it. And for yours, is there ever any frustrating that the services, you haven't been called, or you're ready to go somewhere and you want to be included in something but you haven't been? Is there any situations where you can't put you become frustrated, or there's friction with other services that you're like, we're best placed to be there but we haven't been called? Or I
think what happens sometimes is we turn up with something and another service may not understand what it is we actually do, because, as you quite rightly say, it it's very difficult for you to understand it whenever we don't explain it to you. So, but over the years, that's become less and less and less, as you would expect. There are still some people who have resistance, and we're shocked at times, to be truthful with you, how some people who are paid professionals and unpaid professionals would react to other organisations that they don't really understand what they're doing, and that can talk about ourselves. Generally speaking, we're extremely welcome where we go, but there is a need, to keep this education, this awareness going about where we fit into the role, because we can only talk about it in podcasts like this and in scenarios like this where we're not actually affecting people. And Sharon was talking earlier about, we had our BBC documentary series, which actually tremendously helped what we do, because we've been working away there for years doing all these calls and all the rest of it, and people are going, who are those people?
So you sorry to there was a documentary, so this was new to me too. So there was a documentary series. There's 3 series on BBC. Yeah. What was the name of the show?
Well, it's called The Search, and it was based very much on the people that we who do the searching, and the people that we search for, and all with the cooperation of families. And we had some tragedies on it. One of the big focuses of one of the searches was the Noah Donahue search for the young man in Belfast, and his family were very helpful and cooperative in sending a message out. Because one of the specifications,
involved in that.
Yeah, very much heavily involved in that. But as we were in most of the high profile ones, but we'll not always be high profile ourselves. And that, unfortunately, in that one we were, because the TV cameras were everywhere on it, and that sometimes happens and we can't control that. But what I want to say is, we don't do anything without the full cooperation of the family and the police. We all work together to keep that. We had, you'll know it, not to use the name, but recently in England, we had a situation that was very highly publicised about a young lady who went missing, and it just went bananas in the press. We were talking about, because I'm involved with Lowland Rescue, I'm actually the current chair for the whole of the UK and Ireland, and so we have 38 teams in Lowland Rescue. We're just one of them, and we're all sister organisations ourselves. And as a national organisation, we were involved in some of the advice and guidance around that situation. And we talk about this often as learning. That was one search for one lady that was missing that caught the media. But at the same time as that was going on, there was another 10 going on at the exact same time, in the north of England, just in the north of England. Hundreds gone on across the whole country. But that one caught the media. And then we have a situation where people who, for their own ends, come on and start misjudging the situation. We're always very, very aware that no matter what we say, it's going to have an impact. So you've got to watch carefully what you say.
And especially with the news, they will clickbait a single word you've
100%.
said. And I know the situation you're talking, we'll not go into that, but
No.
Noah's was such a high profile here, and it was such a devastating outcome and horrible. And not to get too sinister in it, when Noah goes missing and we use tasked to that straight away.
Absolutely, straight away.
So you had where we now know Noah's ended up. It was such a hard it was it wasn't straightforward, and we won't go into the main details of it. And I don't want you to tell because. And I know, and it's the same with Sean. I don't ask Sean any. If Sean tells me something, I don't ask him anything, and he doesn't volunteer information about that. But then later it comes up that was there in a small town. But that was so high profile. Obviously, a young lad. It was devastating. It's heartbreaking for you guys, first and foremost. You said the first point there. Does it change then if you find when you find the body, the searches then is it changed because of the legal things you have to step off, that this is now, it could be a potential crime scene? Does it change the way that the operation's dealt with?
Well, something I was mentioned to you earlier on, every search we go to starts off with us as a potential crime. But we're trained. We wouldn't be allowed to be used by the police if we don't train all our people that way. We're approaching everything from the perspective of we don't know what happened here. And that's why I talked about members of the public involvement, etc. We've no idea what happened here. But whenever you talk about the Noah Dunn search, I mean, and I'm not suggesting in the slightest there's anything at all untoward. I'm just saying to you, from our perspective, we came and done the search. We were involved in searching for days for him, and he was finally found by a specialist team from the police. The fact of the matter is that's our involvement in that, apart from liaising with the family, working with the family, and supporting the family, and them supporting us. Anything else outside of that, it's not one thing that we would be involved, just like you're not involved in it. So I'd have to say, but if you go back to the general point you're making, it's really, really important that whenever we always remember, and we do always remember, when we're going out to start and do a search, any search, it starts off from a perspective of we don't know what's happened. And on most occasions, you do get an answer. And I think it's really important, I would say to you, if your relative's walking across the road and gets knocked down by a car, regardless of the outcome, you know what happened. You may not understand the full facts, but it'll eventually come out, this is what happened. But if you get somebody who goes missing and you can't really get an explanation for it, whether they're found or not, which is, again, we were talking about an earlier case in England there, where there's lots of things start to come into it, it is unhelpful for the family. It's unhelpful for the searchers, and it's unhelpful for the public in general, because we live in a world now that's full of conspiracy and everything else under the sun, and we're living in a world where, we talk about social media, but in media of any general, we're sitting here doing media with you. This is positive and constructive and important community podcast we're doing. But not everything out there, as you mentioned, is like that. And, I'm waiting for the day when somebody does one of them fake faces of me doing something I shouldn't be doing. And by the way, I make it clear to anybody listening.
We have a videographer here that can sort that out.
I don't care how real it looks. It wasn't me, okay? I want to get that one in early. Your Honour.
High profile, I just don't see any positives for you guys. I just see having media, cameras, people trampling over, pressing, pushing, getting the public involved. I don't ever see, maybe there is a positive, but I just see that it's just doesn't help with all the press.
And then you would have to say, Bear, but whenever we had a 3-part and then another 3-part documentary series and then another, how could you possibly reconcile that with what we do? And that's the bit that we started this conversation. How we reconciled that was I sat down with the TV producer from the BBC. Number one, it was the BBC, so and a production company for them. Afro-Mike Productions, and the lady who runs that was phenomenal. I have to say, she's phenomenal. And it's first class. She was understanding for the word go. We sat down with her, and that was our first bit.
You had to know that.
That's the bit where we done her suitability.
Okay.
She was available, but we just checked her suitability. We didn't give her
capable.
She had the capability, but we were just checking the suitability. And whenever we talked to her and her team, and look, we made it very clear: we will only get involved in this if we can send a different message in every series. one about suicide awareness, one about dementia, right? One about hope. We had our very clear what we were doing, and I had full autonomy over as the regional commander of the organisation. I had full autonomy over every single piece of footage. Can I tell you, there was lots of footage we couldn't use.
That's like our podcast.
and one of them in particular, a number of them in particular to do with me and my language at times. And I have to say, I'm not talking French or German here.
I think you should have had let the real Sean out.
I think the real Sean come out on many occasions. And then the other one that we were very careful about was that we didn't expose anybody that shouldn't be exposed. And the families were all involved, including the people themselves, in any of the stories that were published and done it. So there's very strict grounds.
Delicate operation.
Delicate operation. And
velvet gloves.
But it was one of the most successful series in Northern Ireland. But what it done for us as an organisation, it meant that a lot of people out there actually started to say, I know now what they do. We know what mountain rescue does. We know what cave does. It sells itself, but what's lowland rescue do? And it became very, very clear to them what it is we do. And from that, I'd have to say it was probably a major turning point for us in a lot of ways, because we could never, in 20 years, we couldn't have got to the number of people we got to say, this is what our teams do and why they do it, and this is what the outcome is. So it was very useful that way. And podcasts like this are equally as important, very much.
Before we wrap up, Sean, I think there's an important thing we need to discuss. You are very, very much the team and what they've achieved.
Sir Sean.
But I have Lord Handsome Stranger here, but we actually have a Sir Sean OBE, which absolutely congratulations. Look, listen.
See, you kept at this stage because I warned you at a very early stage.
You would leave. But John, and we had a conversation about this, and you're a modest guy, and it is an absolute credit to you. The team, the even the passion you have for it is thrilling. I listening to you and your passion, how articulate you are on it, I can see how you received your OBE. But even when you were talking about it earlier, you were like, I wasn't going to accept that. It was the team's recognition. But I think fair play to you, and I think it was a recognition, of your team. But like, you're in the UK, in Ireland, helping. There's hundreds of people that's been found. From what you've started to what you're doing to obviously use guys.
The reality is what you've just said is 100% right. So there's hundreds of people who are now still walking the streets because of them. I was involved in the application process of the OBE. So there was 3 of us.
So now it comes in.
There was 3 of us, and it was so under the radar. Like, it was just, I remember getting a phone call one day. Are you with anyone? Yeah, well, move away. Like, it's just unbelievable. But I've known him for long enough. That obviously we weren't allowed to talk to him about it, but I've known him for long enough to know that there was no way in this world that he would accept it for him. He would only ever accept it on behalf of us as an organisation, because Sean's only as good as his team, and I'm only as good as him, and I'm definitely not as good as him. But we're all of us are only as good as other people. But I knew in that application process, which is long, it's 9 or 10 months in length, but there was no way he was ever going to accept that on behalf of him. It was always going to be on behalf of us. And when he finally found out, I think that was a stipulation that he actually accepted. It was only because
it was a very definite stipulation. But
sure.
Let's get away from this series.
No, because you're getting embarrassed, and I love it. And I'm just going to finish off by saying you are the first Lord we've had in the podcast. We've had a lot of people that thought they were a Lord. But
I would tell you that. Mentioning Geordie again. Geordie was at a meeting at Stormont, one of the policy groups were on, and when they came out, a very senior police officer said to him, I hear that your esteemed leader, which was, I don't know whether a tongue-in-cheek remark or what he was, said to Geordie, I hear your esteemed leader got himself an OBE, and I suppose you'll have to go to call him sir now. And Geordie says, let me stop you right there. I've always had to call him sir. but one of the very, just to take it off this serious subject, I certainly embarrassed my family to the eyeballs when we were taken to Windsor Castle, and a few of them were allowed to come with me to receive it, which was lovely and very nice. And Prince William himself wanted to do it because of the connection between us, and he had actually been the person who recommended it. And so he waited and wanted to do it. And we had the Queen's death in between, etc. But when I finally got there, we're in these lovely rooms, and they put the people who will be in one room, and they put people for the other, or wards in another. So we're there, and I'm standing looking, and I looked around, and my boys are there, and my daughter and I looked, and I seen this guy standing, and I said, I know that boy's face. And my son says, of course you do, Dad. And I said, how do I know him? Where do I know him from? And he says, well, that's Rio Ferdinand, right, who was getting his OB the same day. And I said, right, what's he do? What's he do? And one of my boys said, Daddy plays football. But of course, I now know Rio Ferdinand does lots more than that. Okay, it's a big charity work and all that. But I said, I must go over and say hello to him. And before they could grab me, I walked straight over, and there he was with his now wife, because I think he lost his first wife and his sister. And I walked up and stuck my hand out, and I says, your name Rio? And he says, yes. And I said, Sean, how are you? Nice to meet you. and he says, hello, how are you? And so him and I had this conversation, which was fantastic, about just chat about things in general, And I said to him, so I believe you got this for football. Which I think was the worst thing I could have said. Was so they had Stanley explain to me, no, actually, no, I got a award because of my charity work and et cetera, et cetera. And I said, you know what I'm going to do? As soon as we get out here, I'm going to have a wee look on the internet and see all about you. And there I am, my son and daughter, they're all standing there going, oh my God, take him away here, please someday. But I mean, it's just amazing. These people, all of them are just, these are people who are genuinely just trying to do their best for their communities and doing the type of thing they do. And I would have to say, the biggest privilege is to be standing along with people who are doing like-minded things to yourself. And then, as I say, he made it very clear he was there receiving on behalf of all those who had worked alongside him, and I was saying exactly the same. And there was this famous football pundit and all the rest of it. So when the World Cup was on there, I could see him there sweating away in the studio and looking and thinking, he was sweating worse than that the day he got the OB.
Well, Sean, what was Prince William like? He comes across such a nice guy, and sincere, and you can see he has a passion for them sorts of things, very like his mother and involved in that. What was it like having a friend in what you now do, somebody that sat and listened and firsthand and just...
Yeah. And it is a very good point. A friend is the right word, because I sit in the Royal Foundation for Mental Health along with him now. You invite him onto that. And I would see him, and I've seen him in his relaxed mode in his jeans and his shirt. But he's no different there than he is when you see him on he's a very extremely genuine individual. And I would stand by that, said to anybody, it's a man who is a family man. He's a man of the people, and he's also very interested in everybody else, and he's got that experience, because he used to be in the search and rescue world. He was in the air ambulance. He understands what this is all about. And you see, when you've got somebody who understands it. I mean, I had the privilege of sitting beside Prince Philip, God rest him, as we would say in Northern, but and the Queen was across the table at one time at a lunch, a community lunch, and he was sitting right next to me, and I was assigned by the person in charge to have an interesting conversation. Your job is to have an interesting conversation with His Royal Highness. And I said, that's going to be good. We're right for this one. And he has quite a reputation, as you know. And I have to say, some of the conversation I'd have to this day, I don't know whether he was serious or he wasn't. I'm not going to disclose it, but it was very interesting, especially when he asked me about search and rescue and missing people. But Prince William, on the other hand, has got it off to pat. He really has. He understands it inside out. But I think more importantly about the whole thing is that he genuinely is interested in people. And you can see even his wife Catherine's the same. And I don't know what the future holds for royal family in the future. Queen Elizabeth was there for such a long time, and then the changes are happening. I think King Charles, as he is now, understands the need for a more embracing royal family. But his son, most definitely, and I'd say both his sons, but particularly Prince William, has got that long ago. He's been that way from I'd say birth, and that would come from. I also had the privilege, I'm not name dropping here, but I'm meeting his mother, and he knew that, and I had met her on a number of occasions. And Princess Diana was exactly the same. When she was Diana to me, and I was Sean to her, and William and I were the exact same. I mean, the first thing William saw on records on the camera, he had been briefed and told that I wasn't great at timekeeping. And I had been briefed and told that he wasn't great at timekeeping. So his team had said to me, look, you see when he comes to spend some time with you here, we're on a schedule, and it's really important. And this has been days before when I was briefed. I said, you're very important. You've got to keep him on schedule. I said, me keep him on schedule? I thought that was the funniest thing ever, but they didn't think it was funny. So whenever he got out of the car and come Belfast Castle, was welcomed by the dignitaries to come to me. He come up to me and walk up and says to me, well, Sean, it's great to meet you in person at last, he said. And his exact words was, I hear you're a stickler for timekeeping. And my answer to him was, I said, well, William, I have to be honest, I've been told you're not, so let's get on road here because we've got no time. and the whole way around we had an absolute hoot, the two of us. I mean, the cameras were very interested, and the TV was asking, what were you talking about, afterwards? And I said, we were just having some fun together. And it was a serious subject, but in between in the walks, anybody that sees the film on the TV, we were having him and I were having a really good personal one-to-one on the way around, but different things. But a lot of it was very humorous. I mean, I got the name of one of my volunteers wrong just seconds after he had said to me, well, a minute after he said to me, you know, Sean, I'm totally amazed here. I'm not trying to do his voice. I couldn't do that. But he said, I'm actually amazed here that you remember all these people's names, because we had lots of people there who were doing this. And I said, yeah. I said, so you get to know them all out. And the next person I introduced him to, one of the ladies, I called her by her name, and she says, I'm sorry to correct you, Sean, but that's not my name. So he thought this was hilarious and had a real good laugh at this. And so we started to walk back down on trying to stick to the schedule. Some girl come up, one of the ladies that look after him, his secretary, come up, and she leaned over. She said, Sean, Your Highness, I just want to say, good stuff, you're right on schedule, which neither him or I had a clue that we were on schedule, but it was nice to get a reaffirmation we were. I don't know how that happened, probably was around the downhill slope at the time. And he said, oh, thank you very much, Claire, for example. I can't remember what he said to her name. Thank you for Claire. And she said, oh, I'm sorry, Your Highness, but I'm actually Alice, right? Well, the two of us I have to say, burst into laughing. And that poor girl probably thought, what did I say? But actually, in the context of what had happened about 3 minutes before that, and where he had literally, using Northern term, slagged me rotten for he said, I take back everything I said, you haven't a clue who these people are, and you had a bit of laugh at me. And I said, should I say something here, Your Highness? And he said, well, you know it's William, and stop taking the piss. And that was the words he said. So he even knows to say stop taking the piss. So he's had many experiences, I'm sure, of somebody taking the piss, excuse the expression, on the helicopters and the work he'd done in the past. And he knows how to do it himself. So that's what you want in life.
Am I right in thinking that was Emergency Services Day? Yeah,
it was Emergency Services Day, and it was the first thing they'd done after the COVID lockdown. And they came and spent some time. But I mean, we got him into his jeans and his top, and we took him up through Cave Hill, and he'd done a bit of search, and we showed him how to find a missing person, how it worked. And at the very end of it, I'll finish off as in this, and it's the same for any person that's a member of our organisation, anybody we can help. When we're finishing off at the end, we gave him, which a lot of my team thought was hilarious and quite annoyed some of them, we gave him a hat, a CRS hat, and a CRS jacket, and made him an honorary member of the CRS, in which he, of course, he had to be briefed about before and agreed to that. So he took it in front of the cameras, and he said, I think it's a real privilege for me to be, I always consider myself a member of this team going forward. And some of my erstwhile colleagues afterwards said, we've been trying to get a hat for 2 years. How can we get one? And I said, well, it's a bit of difference, But I mean, they were like gold dust at that time. We were waiting on our hats coming because of COVID. They hadn't come. They were run out of them.
Well, that's the same hat you brought for us today, wasn't it?
we got certain finish your Lord, what's it called?
Lord Handsome.
Well, I get the handsome bit, but
no, it's not Lord. Hey, no, it will not be. There's only one Royal Sean in here, but hey, it's been absolutely fantastic. And I'm going to be honest, podcasts are very funny, that you don't know from one day to the next which one you're really, really going to enjoy. And I genuinely never care which ones do really well, because I can't tell anymore. But
I have to tell you from my experience, none of your podcasts. Hopefully we can change that for you.
Aidan, cut that bit out.
I've massively enjoyed it, and I've massively enjoyed getting to know what it is you do, and I'm genuinely enthusiastic for you, and I'm looking forward. We'll do a competition, raise some money, and hopefully it can go towards something.
Well, I know
a
you
couple
like,
of hats.
I know you like to have a bit of a slag at me here about this royal thing, and you should never know it. But let me say this: the similarity, the only similarity between myself and the likes of Prince William is the fact that, and our team, and Prince William and royalty, is the fact that they will never exist without the support of the entire community, and we're exactly the same. That is the biggest similarity. They'll never exist without the support of the people, and we're exactly the same. And they're people from the people, and we're just exactly the same. So if that's the similarity that makes us the same as them, I'm more than happy with that. See the rest of that rubbish you're talking. The people out there know you're talking rubbish. That doesn't matter.
A lot of my role, just to touch on it before we finish, a lot of my job or role is to make sure we have the funding to do what he's out doing with our team. So you're talking about doing a competition, and that kind of resonates with me. So not everyone can give us cash out of their pockets, but everyone can give us something that they have in their hand. So time, doing a competition, making someone food when they're out on a search, when they're there for hours on end. So he's talking about our support team earlier. We're in Cookstown right now, we're sitting here. I would have a fair idea that if he needs a base in Cookstown to establish a search for a few hours, we're on the phone to you guys, because you can give that. It's in your hand to do. We're trying really hard, right or wrong, to establish a base in this general.
A team in the
Middlesbrough,
Marafelt Cooks down here.
you know,
We're in the process
location.
of that at the moment. Yeah.
Well, hey,
So
you know,
everyone can't give us coin. Everyone can't give us money, but they can give us what's in their hand.
and you will find that there'll be a lot of people around here shocked too, and
Oh, aye.
and if they can offer facilities, absolutely will, and of course we will too. But we're only saying that on camera. We'll cut it out. I'm only joking, but absolutely, and I'm sure a lot of people here. But also, there's a lot of people there. If you have a few £, we're going to put up a link, and you can fire a few £.
Now,
over.
what we would like to invite you to in front of all the public here is that we run, and this is important, we run
I'm getting hijacked here.
in July. And we'd like to give people value for money. So here's the value for money bit comes. We run the River Raft Challenge, which is where we use river rafts. You don't have to build them. They're inflatable rafts we use. And we run in the Lagan and on the River Ban, and Portland on up and down around the route, and the Lagan the same thing. In July, 1 week after the other 2 weekends. So what we do is we ask businesses and people like yourself to put in a team, fancy dress, 4 people to raft, and it's a fantastic day. We have so
I am
much
so
fun.
competitive. I'm like, I'm going to go and win that.
and
thing.
Literally, that's
They're
ours.
not, they're not hand built rafts like the raft race in Port Rush, where the people build them out of barrels and stuff. These are we provide that. We provide the life jacket, we provide the buoyancy aids. All we need is your fancy dress and some fundraising and join and enter and come along, and you'll be there amongst all the rest of them. And I'm sure you could come up with some fancy name, the Bear Mobile or whatever you want to call it. I don't know. Or,
Bar and Scully, take to the water. No bar.
and we know
We're like Paw Patrol.
it's I think Paw Patrol. I would like to see you guys all in Paw. And Ian, by the way, you're not been left out of this now. On that paddling as hard as you can up that river.
There's no absolutely 100% we'll be there.
You should be.
That sounds
Yeah.
like a
And
crack.
hopefully anybody else.
And we're going to
listening
vlog it so that everyone can see me
Excellent.
going head over shite.
You're going to have
into
to
the
explain
water.
what a vlog is here.
Well, we'll keep.
He didn't
showing.
know
Is
what
that
podcast
as a
was before he
blog?
came
I
in
always
here.
thought a blog was somewhere where you dig peats. Probably a blog.
Video
turf.
logging. Vlogging.
That's
Hey, we didn't know what it was till a few weeks ago either. So
He's ringing me on the way up the road. What is this? What is a podcast, Sean? I don't know what it is.
6 months ago, I phoned Sean and he asked me the exact same thing too.
I know
We're in
what
the
a
same boat.
podcast is, but I just didn't really understand how the procedure worked. But now I've got it. All right. So.
Well, look, listen, I've really enjoyed it. I've had a great time. I'm looking forward to Paw Patrol on the water. And I wish you all. I hope your phone never rings.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
And likewise, thank you so much for your time.
And thank you very much.
To your listeners out there, always remember, there's the last thing that dies is hope. Always remember, never give up hope. That's important.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
you.